na Ursula ito, may mga reblocking, may mga nagkahulog-hulog na mga kalsada. Anong gagawin natin sa FLR? Kasi sabi kanina nga ni Deputy Speaker Liatson, wala ito sa Constitution. This is the first time that we are encountering this monster. This is a creation of the Executive Department. Hindi ito creation ng Congress. But on the other hand, kami ang nangangako, kaming mga representatives, ang nangangako sa mga constituents namin, huwag kayong mag-alala at may pera yan. Kasi obligated na yan ng gobyerno. Totoo po ba yun? Obligated na ba yun?
Mr. Chair?
DBM.
Mr. Chair, Your Honor. Yes. At that point, Mr. Chair, Your Honor, hindi pa siya obligated because FLR pa nga siya. Hindi pa siya pwedeng i-obligate. It might be that DPWH proceeded with early procurement on the basis of its of the project being contained in the General Appropriations Act. But they are prevented from awarding the project because there is no obligational authority for them to do so. Kanina po kay Deputy Speaker Liachon, I mentioned an item under the veto message of the President under Article 5, which precisely provides that the President must approve new projects. And the only solution at this point is for us to follow up because I think there has already been 3 batches out of 10 or 11 batches that has been forwarded, which was approved already. So, sasabihin po namin ang concerns and follow up because the year is about to end and baka hindi matuloy yung maantala pa yung mga projects further. So kami naman po, we are giving the Honorable Representative the assurance that once we receive the OP approval, it will not take us 3 days to release the SARO for these projects, Mr. Chair, Your Honor.
But how do we know, Mr. Chair, kung kasama ito sa sinasabi na may mga change, hindi namin alam. How do we explain this to our constituents? Especially in the light of the fact na nagdaan ang mga ilang dilubyo sa distrito namin. Kasama ba talaga ito sa sinasabi ng Presidente na kailangan ng approval niya?
Mr. Chair, Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Chair, I yield to the DBM USEC.
Mr. Chair?
DBM, please proceed.
Ang ano po nito, there is actually a circular which actually segregates the amount corresponding to for later release and yung for comprehensive release. So kung hindi po nakasama sa for comprehensive release yung project, ibig sabihin po noon bago po ito. I think the total amount here is around 140 plus billion pesos. To date, I think the release has been around approximately 31 or 32 billion pesos. So, kung halimbawa ho, as to kung kasama yung project nyo doon sa distrito nyo, I think the proper agency or department to ask is the DPWH and the District Engineering Office in charge of the project. If there are changes in the project, meaning baka nagkaroon ng doon sa monument, yung meron mga ano yun meron mga description po yun, we will have to see kung halimbawa it is within the parameter of the whole road. Kung kasama naman po doon, I don't think there will be any problems. Pero ang mahirap doon kung halimbawa from dredging to roads, yung mga ganon, baka magkaroon tayo ng issue dito kasi dun sa approval ni Presidente, may kasamang augmentation. Pero dun sa concern nyo, kung kasama po yung project na yon, again, I repeat, I think it will be the DPWH which will respond to that question or issue. Kasi recipient lang po kami noong report ng DPWH at on the basis naman kung kompleto na yung fino-forward ho namin agad kay President, dun sa Office of the President for approval kasi new project ito.
Thank you, DB.
Mr. Chair, uulitin ko po, hindi lang itong tanong ko this is not limited to my district. This is a common concern of the representatives lahat sa Congress. Ang point ko is,
Yeah,
kasama o hindi. May we ask Mr. Chair, the good undersecretary to come up with a list, ibigay po sa chair natin para malaman natin, nang malaman naman ng mga constituents natin kung ano ba talaga ang problema. That would be all with the USEC
Congressman
DBM.
Veloso, earlier, the good secretary stated that the FLRs, the third tranche or fourth tranche, will be released. So if your project is part of the remaining FLRs, we were assured by the good secretary that the last tranche of FLRs will be released. Is that correct, Secretary DBM?
Mr. Chair, just a slight correction. I mentioned that we will follow it up with the
Yes.
proper authorities. If the final approval or release of the SARO is dependent on the approval from the Office of the President. And one of the requirements under the veto message under Article or Item 5 includes that approval. So our hands are tied here. We cannot release, Your Honor, Mr. Chair, the amount unless we receive the OP approval on these projects.
So there you are, Congressman Veloso. That is a statement of...
Kaya nga, gusto ko I just requested kung pwede, bigyan tayo ng listahan nang hindi naman tayo nananaginip. But to the NEDA, Mr. Chair, my last question.
Thank you. Please wind up.
Yes, I have only one question to NEDA. The 10-point economic agenda you have in your briefer, particularly item number 6, mentions land management, which includes a goal to ensure land security. And in the end, you are encouraging expeditious titling of lands to encourage investments. Ang tanong ko po, ang pinakamabilis na paraan para matituluan ng mga lupa in the past is cadastral proceeding. But I have not seen in the past budget hearings any proposal for any amount para sa cadastral proceeding. Bakit po, Your Honor, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Chair, if I may respond in general terms, because on the details, I think it would be better to request Department of Agrarian Reform. In the 10-point socioeconomic agenda, we recognize that property rights security is very important to encourage investment, job creation in agriculture. That is why this is one of our key areas. There are several programs na ongoing. For instance, there are collective titles that we are trying to individualize. There are also, I understand, a new law that allows for easier titling of agriculture land, provided that you have had tilled that for several years. So these are some of the programs. There is also, I think, several other measures under the Department of Agrarian Reform, but I cannot speak for them as to why their budget is so, but maybe we can refer to the DAR. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I am not referring to DAR titling in general. Ang cadastral survey in the past, the last cadastral survey we had in Leyte was 1984. Madali lang yun, kaya lang, hindi inakyat ng surgeon sa cadastral court para tawagin ang mga may-ari sa lot 1, 2, etc. And on the basis of which, madali lang mag-o-order ng court, bigyan mo na ito ng titulo dahil siya naman ang may-ari. Yan ang tinatawag ko pong cadastral proceeding po, Mr. Chair. Pwede po bang masikaso ito ng NEDA?
Mr. Chair, not NEDA, I believe, but perhaps we can refer to the other agencies that are in charge, because NEDA's mandate is not does not cover this. But I can check with the other departments on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That will be all.
Thank you, Congressman Veloso. The last to interpolate again is my good friend, Congressman Carlos Zarate.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Chair. Mga ilang punto na lang po para pa rin dito sa ating budget. Ang sunod ko po na katanungan, kadugtong lang ito ng mga naitanong ko na kanina, no, sa paglilinaw sa budget. At patungkol naman po sa actual spending ng ating national government, no? And I hope we can get a reply either from DBM or the Department of Finance. I noticed that the actual spending of the national government, Mr. Chair, is always less than the program expenditure as we approved in the General Appropriations Act since 2016, no? Except for 2020. For example, we approved 3.001 trillion in 2016, but the actual expenditure is only 2.682 trillion. In 2019, fast forward, we approved 3.757 trillion. The actual expenditure is only 3.6. And in 2020, ito na yung sinabi ko na medyo nagkaiba lang, we approved 4.1 trillion, but the actual expenditure is 4.3 trillion. May we get an explanation from DBM or DOF, why is this so, Mr. Chair?
DBM, why historical? DBM. The DBM.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. The host did not want me to unmute kanina. Mr. Chair, may I respond now? Mr. Chair?
Yes, please proceed.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Just for the record, the obligations or as mentioned, expenditure is not the responsibility of DBM nor the Department of Finance in this case. It is the responsibility of agencies and departments. Once we release the allotment, the obligation side, meaning contracting it out to third parties and even government agencies, is the responsibility of departments and agencies. So, Your Honor, Mr. Chair, I think in this case, the proper entity to ask here would be the agencies corresponding to those who underspent their allotment releases, Mr. Chair, Your Honor.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Chair. Maraming salamat, Yusek Kanda. Totoo po yun, no? Kung isa-isahin natin. But dito po, pinag-uusapan natin, kabahagi kayo ng DBCC, kasi nagiging pattern na siya. Nag-a-approve ang Kongreso ng malaking pondo at ang actual obligation ay mababa from 2016 up to 2019. At syempre, dahil kayo ay nasa DBCC, nakikita nyo yan. But then again, taon-taon tumataas ng lumalaki ang ating pondo, hindi naman ito na-obligate, no, ng mga agencies. So my next question, if this were so, saan po napupunta yung mga pondo na taon-taon na hindi naman nauubos ng mga agencies, Mr. Chair? Do they revert back to the Treasury immediately, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
Your Honor.
DBM.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
What happened?
It depends. It depends, as Your Honor, Mr. Chair, on the nature of the allotment. If the allotment is for personal services, then by policy or procedure, it reverts at the end of the year. If there is I'm talking of a situation where there is an extension in the appropriation or the allotment itself. On a year-to-year basis kasi, under the cash budgeting system, all these allotments that have been issued, which remains unobligated, should be reverted to the unappropriated surplus of the Bureau of Treasury. But on a year-to-year basis, there are resolutions issued by both houses of Congress which allow, because there are substantial amounts which remain unobligated at the end of the year. So, the answer to your question, Your Honor, Mr. Chair, is that part of it, assuming that the appropriation or allotment is extended, part of it is reverted, and part of it becomes continuing appropriation, and it adds up to the program of the agency in the next year?
Maraming salamat, Mr. Chair, Madam Secretary. Siguro, hihingin na lang din natin ng detailed report, no? Yung differences nung between the expenditure program and the actual obligation. I'll go now to a related topic, Mr. Chair. Also, I observed that at the end of the fiscal year since 2016, no, pinag-aralan natin and nakita natin na napakalaki, no, nung entry on unreleased appropriation, unobligated allotment, which totaled to unused appropriation. No? For example, in 2016, the total unused appropriation, which is pinagsamang unreleased appropriation and unobligated allotment, is nasa 596 billion plus. No? Then in 2017, it's in 388 billion. Finally, I'll move forward. In 2019, the unreleased appropriation is something like 96 billion 401 million. The unobligated allotment is 225 billion, or a total of unused appropriation of 321 506 and 630 billion. No? So in 2020, the unused appropriation is 262 billion 241.72. Ang tanong ko po dyan, Mr. Chair, and to Secretary Kanda, ano po ang nangyayari dito sa unused appropriations, na napakalaking mga unused appropriations na ito?
DBM.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
Mr. Chair?
DBM.
Yes. Just to clarify, I don't have the data with me, but historically, election years have large balances because of the election ban. No? So 2016 being an election year, if you will notice, the unutilized and unobligated is unreleased, and the unobligated is rather substantial. But on a year-to-year, from that year on, henceforth, it wasn't that bad. Ang nangyayari po dyan, yung unreleased appropriation during the subsequent year, kung kung extended yung appropriation, marirelease po yan upon submission of the request of the agency. Ngayon po, yun po naman unobligated, pwede pong gamitin pa rin yan ng agency sa susunod na taon. Again, assuming na pwede pang assuming na extended pa rin yung buhay ng appropriation na yon. So yun pong dalawang yun pwedeng gamitin. Dun sa unreleased appropriation and unobligated allotment, what will happen here is that kung ang personal services hindi na-extend, then that should be reverted. The agency cannot use it anymore because it was not extended. In previous years, it is the practice not to extend personal services. I think it began last year or in 2019, where even personal services was extended. So ganun po yun. So automatic nagre-revert yung amount corresponding to personal services. So yung continuing niya, which corresponds to the unreleased and unobligated, is carried over to the next year, and it is added to the specific agency's budget. That is the answer, Your Honor, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, DBM.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Secretary. Sige po, I'll take that answer for now. Palalimin na lang po natin pagdating sa... No? So ang lumalabas lang kasi dito, kaya tanong ko yan, Mr. Chair, no? Palaki ng palaki ang ating taunang budget, but nakikita rin natin ang trend, napakaraming unreleased appropriation, unobligated appropriation every year. No? Na kung ito sana ay maayos na nagamit ng mga ahensya, ay napupunta ito sa dapat kapuntahan niya na kagalingan ng ating mga kababayan. No? Especially now that we are in a severe crisis aggravated by this pandemic. No? So, I'll go now to my next point, Mr. Chair. No? At ito naman ay kadugtong din nung tinanong natin bakit napakaraming mga pondo pa pala na hindi na-release at hindi na-obligate. Mr. Chair, in the past, especially last year na itanong ko ito, napansin natin, Mr. Chair, na since 2016, 17, 18, and 19, ay hindi na natin nakita sa budget books yung overall savings. No? And in fact, during my interpellation last year, ang sagot sa atin ng DBM, especially sa then Secretary Abisado, wala nang savings dahil sabi niya ay nagastos na yan, ubos na yan. So, but we are glad, Mr. Chair, nang tiningnan natin ang budget books ngayon, we are surprised that overall savings is back to the pages of the budget books, no? Ito yung entry sa budget books na makikita natin yung budgetary adjustments, no? Ito yung mga transfers to and transfers from. So, just an example, Mr. Chair, in 2016, fiscal year 2016, transfers to, ibig sabihin mga pondo ito na nilipat, no? From one agency to the other, it amounted to 363 billion, 0.4, no? And transfers from 363 billion. Fast forward, 2019, 286 billion were transferred to one agency to the other, while again the same amount transferred from one agency to the other. So my question now, Mr. Chair, to DBM, to Secretary Kanda, why is this so? No? In the past years, wala ito sa ating budget books, but now there was a decision to revert back to reflect this kind of entry in our budget books, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Congressman. You have reached your 5 minutes. DBM, the policy of transfers, please
Yes.
elaborate.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Your Honor. This is rather unique. The year 2020 is unique because bayanihan, there was a previous case, if I'm not mistaken, something like Araulio. It was disallowed, the use of savings that were being pooled. Now, under 2020, the pooling of savings was again allowed under a specific law known as BIHAW or Bayanihan Hill as one, which is the Bayanihan Bayanihan Law. So it was allowed, Your Honor, Mr. Chair. So that's the reason why, for the first time in a long time, that pooled savings again appeared in the National Expenditure Program. Thank you, Your Honor, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that reply, Mr. Chair. But then again, you admitted that in the previous years, there are savings na na-accumulate ang mga agencies. Is that a correct appreciation, Mr. Chair? Tama po ba yun?
Yes, Your Honor, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I would like to respond to...
Yes.
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, there is indeed savings, as you correctly pointed out, Honorable Congressman, on a year-to-year basis, there is savings. But in this case, it cannot be pooled for purposes of more important programs. It remains in the agency's books, and thereafter they can use it to continue the programs that they have already undertaken for that year. Thank you, Your Honor, Mr.
Would you
Chair.
like to wind up?
Yes,
Thank you.
I'll just finish this subject matter, Mr.
Thank you.
Exactly, Mr. Chair. No? In the Araulio versus Aquino case, the DAP case, actually what is prescribed there, no, is to augment a budgetary item that is not covered with a program, activity, or project. No? But it's not, hindi ho sinasabi doon na hindi na yung mga savings ay hindi na nire-recognize. No? So as admitted by Secretary Kanda, there are savings. So my question now, Mr. Chair, if the DBM can submit to us a detailed report, no? If indeed these agencies generated savings, ano ang nangyari sa savings na yan? Because under the Constitution, you can only use that savings to augment an existing project, activity, and program. And we cannot just assume that the agencies use this sa mga projects nila. Because in fact, as admitted earlier, there are a lot of unreleased appropriation and obligated funds. No? And just to finish on this issue, Mr. Chair, also, if there are savings, under our GAA, if I may look at the exact provision. For example, in fiscal year 2020, GAA, there's a special provision there, Mr. Chair, no? That there is a need for DBM to post all of these savings, including, no, if I may read, um, the DBM, no, shall make a report and shall indicate, among others, the amount of savings generated, the sources and grounds used, therefore, and the existing program, activity, or project and their respective appropriations augmented. They shall likewise ensure that the said reports are posted on their respective websites. Ang nakikita po natin sa website, Mr. Chair, ng DBM, are only the agency from which the savings were derived and not the particular project, activity, or program, or PAP, from which the savings were derived. So at this point, Mr. Chair, may we request and in fact instruct DBM to follow the provisions of the General Appropriations Act of 2020 to immediately post in their website and to make a report to us. No? Ano ba ang how much is the savings generated in the previous years and up to now? Ano ang pinagamitan nito? What are the items augmented? No? Either it's a program or activity or project. And if those savings were not used as augmentation, ano ang nangyari sa mga savings na yon? So, may we get a reply from the DBM, Mr. Chair?
DBM, you are required to prepare a report on the status of the previous disbursements, expenditures, savings, as requested by Minority Congressman Carlos Zarate.
Mr. Chair, may I just clarify that for last year, the DBM has
Mula lang sa
submitted its report annually.
Yes.
And this has been submitted to the committee, I think to the Speaker of the House. But since there is a request, we will comply and we will submit this report
Thank you,
to
Secretary.
the Committee
Thank
on
you.
Appropriation.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Not only the submission of the report, but the requirement of the General Appropriations Act that this report and the specifics of that report shall be published in the website of the DBM. No? Para makita natin doon, Mr. Chair, ano ba ang pinagamitan ng savings na yon? No? What kind of project, activity, or program? Because that is the mandate of the GAA. No? So, kaya yun po ang hinahanap natin dahil hindi po natin makita yan ngayon doon sa website. And finally, Mr. Chair, kaya tinitingnan natin itong mga numero na ito dahil sabi nga natin, unprecedented itong budget ngayon. 5 trillion in our history. And as we have presented this previously, napakaraming pondo. In fact, even these findings of the Commission on Audit now reveals that maraming pondo na hindi nagagamit yung mga agencies. In one case, for example, in the Department of Health, no, they transferred 42 billion doon sa DBM procurement service para daw sa pamimili ng PPEs, testing kits. And only to find out that there is no memorandum agreement for that. No? In fact, they claim that there are savings generated. But saan napunta yung savings na yon? No? Kung naka-generate ng 2 billion na savings, eh sana nagamit ito, Mr. Chair, na augmentation doon sa special risk allowance ng ating mga healthcare workers. But wala. No? So that's the reason why tinitingnan natin ito. 5 trillion ang budget na ito. Napakarami pa palang pondo na hindi nagagamit in the past. And we are just repeating this year after year after year. No? So I hope the DBM, Mr. Chair, can further enlighten us on this. Dahil how would the people know that these budgetary adjustments are really savings, itong transfers to, transfer from, that these unobligated portions of any release appropriations are really result of completion of a project or there is a final discontinuance of a project, no? So, again, Mr. Chair, I hope the DBM will immediately publish in their website the requirement of of the General Appropriations Act as to how much savings are generated and what are the sources of these savings, saan ginamit itong savings na ito, at magkano na lang ang naiwan sa overall savings na yan, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Congressman Zarate. Points well enumerated. DBM, you are requested to dynamically update your website on the disbursements, the utilization of the budgets of the various departments. Is there any motion to terminate the proceedings?
Mr. Chair, since there's honor, no, interpolator, wala na. Wala na. I move to terminate today's budget briefing.
Second, Mr. Chair.
Yes, there is second the motion to terminate the budget brief of for the DBCC. The budget briefing for the DBCC is hereby terminated.
Mr. Chair,
This budget briefing is suspended until
Mr. Chair,
tomorrow. Yes,
just,
Congressman Sarate.
admin matter lang. The minority also requests that the documents earlier requested by the Honorable Lagman be also furnished to the minority. All documents requested actually be furnished also to the...
Yes, again, before this is terminated, all the documents are requested, starting with Congresswoman Stella Kimbo, Kid Belmonte, Congressman Zarate, and my idol, Congressman Edson Lagman, and then, of course, Deputy Speaker Bernadette Herrera D. Be submitted to the Committee on Appropriations, the DBM, the DOF, NEDA is hereby directed. This budget briefing is suspended until tomorrow at 9 a.m. with Bangko and PCSO. Thank you, gentlemen, and congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Uy, thank you, thank you. Bossing, salamat.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Salamat, sir, sa pasensya, sir.